The girl's voice cut through the Wyoming wind like a knife through silence. "My brother hasn't eaten in 3 days. Will you buy my doll?" Ethan Cole froze one hand on his horse's reins, the other clutching his last silver coin. He was a dead man walking his ranch, dyeing his future dust. But those eyes, hollow with hunger, wouldn't let him move. What happened next would cost him everything he had left. Stay with me until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The dust didn't just blow through Wyoming in the summer of 1886, it buried hope itself. Ethan Cole rode into Casper with his spine straight and his pride in tatters, leading the last cow he owned on a frayed rope. The animal's ribs showed through its hide like prison bars. His own ribs weren't much better. 3 years of drought had turned his ranch from a promise into a graveyard, every field cracked and bleeding dust, every stream a memory of water that used to run. The town looked the same as it always did, wooden buildings bleached gray by sun and wind, their paint peeling like dead skin. Men in worn hats moved along the boardwalks with their heads down, women clutched shawls against the grit that worked its way into everything. The general store stood at the end of Main Street, its windows filmed with dirt that nobody bothered to clean anymore. Hard times made people stop caring about windows. Ethan had planned this ride for 3 days, putting it off until he couldn't anymore. Selling this cow meant admitting defeat. It meant that everything his father had built, every fence post, driven into stubborn ground, every winter survived, every promise made to the land, all of it was finished. The cow would bring maybe $20 if he was lucky, maybe $15 if he wasn't, enough to buy flour and beans for a month, maybe 2 if he was careful. After that, the wind could have him. He was 50 feet from the store when he saw her, a child small and thin as a willow switch, standing at the edge of the boardwalk like a ghost. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, wearing a dress that had been patched so many times it was more patch than dress. Her hair hung in tangles the color of old straw, and her feet, Christ, her feet were bare on the splintered wood, already dirty from the street. She was holding something against her chest. As Ethan got closer, he could see it was a doll made from rags and stuffed with what looked like dry grass. One of its button eyes was missing. The girl watched him approach with an intensity that made his skin prickle. Her eyes were too old for her face, the kind of eyes that had seen too much and understood even more. When he was 10 feet away, she stepped forward, and he saw how carefully she moved, like every step cost her something. "Sir." Her voice was barely louder than the wind. Ethan stopped his horse. Up close, he could see the dirt crusted at the corners of her mouth, the way her collarbones jutted sharp beneath her dress. She was starving. He'd seen enough cattle die to recognize the signs, the hollow cheeks, the dull hair, the skin pulled too tight over bones. "Yes, miss." She held out the doll with both hands like it was made of gold instead of rags. "Will you buy my doll?" The question hit him harder than it should have. He looked at the toy, worthless, falling apart, the kind of thing you'd find in a trash heap. "I don't think I have much use for a doll, little one." "Please." The word cracked in the middle. "My brother hasn't eaten in 3 days." Ethan felt the air go out of his lungs. He looked past her and saw him. Then another child, younger, maybe 5 or 6, sitting on the edge of the water trough. The boy was watching them with wide, empty eyes, his legs dangling in the air, too weak to kick them back and forth, the way children usually did. His feet were bare too, the soles black with dirt. His shirt hung on him like a flour sack on a scarecrow. "Your brother," Ethan heard himself say. "That him there?" She nodded, not looking back. "Tommy. He's 6. He's been real good about being hungry, sir. He doesn't complain, but I can hear his stomach at night, and it sounds like it's eating itself from the inside." The detail was too specific, too vivid. This wasn't a child begging with a rehearsed story. This was truth spoken plain the way children did before the world taught them to hide it. Ethan's hand went to his pocket, feeling the outline of the silver dollar there. His last one. He'd planned to use it for supper at the boarding house, a real meal, the first in a week. His stomach had been talking to him too, especially at night, when sleep wouldn't come, and hunger felt like a living thing gnawing at his insides. "Where's your mama?" he asked. "Your pa." "Mama's sick, real sick. She can't get out of bed no more." The girl's voice stayed steady, but her hands tightened on the doll. "Pa died 2 winters back. Pneumonia took him in 3 days. And you've been on your own since then." Mama worked at the hotel for a while, cleaning rooms, but Mr. Langford raised the rent on our place, and when Mama couldn't pay, he took her wages directly, said we owed him. Then when she got sick and couldn't work no more, he fired her. She said it without anger, just facts laid out like stones. We've been living in the old Hutchins shack since April. Ethan knew the place. A collapsing shanty a mile outside town, no windows, roof half gone. Nobody had lived there in years because nobody could survive there. That's no place for children. It's what we got. Her chin lifted slightly, and for a moment he saw pride there, fierce and burning. "We don't steal, sir. Mama taught us that. We work for what we need. That's why I'm selling my doll." He looked at the toy again. One of the arms was coming loose, held on by a single thread. A button eye missing, grass poking out of a tear in its side. Worth absolutely nothing to anyone except the child holding it, and she was offering it up like it was her last piece of the world. "How much you asking?" "Whatever you think is fair, sir." Her voice wavered for the first time. "I know it ain't much, but it's all I got to sell." Ethan pulled the silver dollar from his pocket. The girl's eyes locked onto it like a hawk spotting prey. He could see her trying not to react, trying to keep her face still, but her breath quickened and her grip on the doll went white-knuckled. "This is too much for a doll," he said quietly. "Please." The word came out desperate now, the dignity cracking. "Please, I'll work for you. I'll do anything I can, clean, I can cook. Tommy can help too. We're good workers. Hush." Ethan held up a hand and she went silent, immediately trembling like a spooked colt. He held out the coin. "Take it. Keep your doll." She stared at the money like it might vanish if she breathed wrong. I can't just take charity, sir. Mama says it's not charity. I'm paying you for information." He nodded toward the general store. "I need to know the best time to sell a cow. You tell me when Mr. Patterson's in the best mood, and we'll call it even." It was a flimsy excuse, and they both knew it, but it gave her a way to take the money without breaking whatever code her mother had drilled into her. The girl grabbed the coin so fast, her hand blurred, clutching it to her chest, alongside the doll. "Mornings," she said quickly. "Mr. Patterson's always nicer in the mornings before the heat makes him cranky. And Thursdays, 'cause that's when the stage comes and he gets his newspapers from back east." "Much obliged." Ethan touched the brim of his hat. "You take that money straight to your brother now. Get him some food." She nodded so hard her whole body moved. "Thank you, sir. God bless you, sir. I'll pray for you every night. I promise I'll—" "Go on now." She actually ran, despite how weak she looked, toward the water trough where her brother waited. Ethan watched her go, saw her showing the coin to the boy, saw his face light up with something that might have been hope, or might have been hunger made desperate. They talked for a moment, heads close together, then headed toward the store. That's when Ethan saw the bruise. As the girl turned, the sleeve of her dress rode up, and there on her forearm was a mark the size of a man's hand, purple and yellow, the kind that came from being grabbed hard. There were others, 2 smaller ones, fingerprint-sized, dotting her skin like a constellation of pain. His jaw tightened. He tied his cow to the post outside the store and followed the children inside. The bell over the door jangled, and Mr. Patterson looked up from behind the counter, his round face already settling into the suspicious expression he wore for anyone who looked too poor to buy much. "Ethan." Patterson's greeting was flat. Selling that cow finally. In a minute. Ethan moved to the side, watching the children from the corner of his eye. The girl approached the counter with her brother's hand locked in hers. She placed the silver dollar on the worn wood with the reverence of someone setting down a crown jewel. "We need bread, please," she said, "and maybe some cheese if there's enough. And milk for Tommy." Patterson picked up the coin, tested it between his teeth, an insulting gesture that made Ethan's hands curl into fists, then nodded. "Bread's a nickel, cheese is 8 cents for a quarter pound, milk's—" "We'll take it all," the girl interrupted, "however much this buys." Patterson's expression didn't soften, but he turned to gather the items. While his back was turned, Ethan saw the boy, Tommy, swaying on his feet. The kid was so weak he could barely stand. His eyes were glassy, unfocused, the way animals looked right before they dropped. "When's the last time you ate?" Ethan asked quietly, moving closer. Tommy looked up at him and for a moment seemed confused about whether to answer. His sister squeezed his hand. "Yesterday morning," the girl said. "Mrs. Chen gave us half a biscuit from her breakfast." 24 hours. Ethan felt something twist in his chest. He'd gone without food plenty of times, knew what hunger felt like when it settled in for a long stay. But a child this young already, this weak, another day or two, and the kid might not wake up. He'd seen it happen during the war. Bodies just gave up when they ran out of fuel. Patterson returned with the items wrapped in brown paper. "That's 35 cents. You got another coin." The girl's face fell. "But I only got the $1. Dollars 100 cents, girl. This is 35 cents worth. You want change or not?" "Yes, sir, please." Patterson counted out the coins with exaggerated slowness, like he was doing her a favor. 65 cents in small change stacked on the counter. The girl scooped them up and shoved them in her pocket, then grabbed the package. "Thank you, sir." She turned to leave Tommy stumbling beside her, and that's when Ethan saw the second thing that made his blood run cold. As they passed the window, a man on horseback stopped outside. Late 30s, wearing a suit too expensive for Casper, Wyoming, his hat clean and creased sharp. He was watching the children with an expression that Ethan had seen before on men's faces, the kind of look that said ownership, that said property. Wade Langford, the man who owned half the town and wanted the other half. Langford's eyes followed the children as they left the store, lingering on the girl, in a way that made Ethan's skin crawl. Then Langford's gaze shifted and met Ethan's through the window. For a moment neither man moved. Then Langford smiled, a thin, cold thing, and touched his hat in mock greeting before riding on. "Problem, Ethan?" Patterson's voice cut through the moment. "No." Ethan turned back to the counter. "What'll you give me for the cow?" $10. "She's worth 20 at least." "Not in this market, she ain't." Patterson leaned on the counter and Ethan could smell whiskey on his breath, despite it being only 10 in the morning. "Drought's got everyone selling. I got 3 cows out back already. Take 10 or take her back home." $10, half what he needed, not even enough for a month's supplies. 12, Ethan said, "and you know that's fair." Patterson considered, then shrugged. 12, but I'm taking it out of the goodness of my heart. There was no goodness in this transaction, and they both knew it, but Ethan nodded. Patterson counted out the money all in small bills and coins, nothing bigger than a 5. Ethan pocketed it and headed for the door. Outside, the wind had picked up, pushing dust devils down the street. His cow was where he'd left her, already being examined by Patterson's hired hand. Ethan didn't watch them lead her away. Some things hurt less if you didn't look. He should have headed to the boarding house, should have gotten that meal he'd been promising himself. Instead, he found his feet carrying him down the street, following the direction the children had gone. He found them sitting in the alley behind the feed store, hidden from the street. They'd torn open the package and were sharing the bread between them, not eating, just taking small bites in turn, chewing slowly to make it last. The cheese sat untouched on the paper, saved for later. The milk bottle was open between them, and they were passing it back and forth, each taking tiny sips. Ethan watched from the corner of the building, staying out of sight. The girl broke off a piece of bread and held it to her brother's mouth. He took it, chewed maybe 3 times, then tried to hand it back. "Eat it all," she whispered. "You need it more. You're hungry too. I'm older. I can wait. Rosie, Tommy, please." Her voice cracked. "Please just eat it for me." The boy, Tommy, ate the bread, and Ethan saw tears running down his dirty face as he did. Not from sadness, but from the simple relief of food in his belly, the end of pain that had become normal. That's when Ethan knew he was about to do something stupid. He'd come to town to save himself, to scratch together enough money to survive another season, to keep his father's land from disappearing into dust and memory. He had $12 in his pocket, enough for maybe 6 weeks, if he was careful, 4 if he wasn't. Winter was coming in 3 months. He had no crop, no cattle, no prospects. Every ounce of sense he had left said to walk away, to save himself, to let someone else solve the problem of 2 starving children and their dying mother. But he was already moving, already stepping into the alley, already opening his mouth. "You too!" They jumped like rabbits spotting a fox. The girl, Rosie, shoved the food behind her back instinctively, and her brother pressed against her side. "We ain't doing nothing wrong, sir," Rosie said quickly. "This is our food. We paid for it fair." "I know you did." Ethan crouched down to their level, making himself smaller, less threatening. Up close, they looked even worse. The dirt wasn't just on their skin, but ground into it, and he could smell them, the sour smell of bodies that hadn't been properly washed in weeks. "I'm not here to bother you. I just wanted to ask about your mama." Rosie's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Why?" "Because I'm wondering if maybe she needs a doctor." "Can't afford no doctor." "What if I paid?" The suspicion deepened. "Why would you do that? You don't know us." It was a fair question, and Ethan didn't have a good answer. "Because I'm tired of watching things die. Because your eyes remind me of my sister's before the fever took her. Because I've got $12 and a death wish anyway. Let's just say I don't like the idea of a woman suffering when I might be able to help," he said finally. "Where's this shack you're staying in?" Rosie looked at Tommy, some silent conversation passing between them. Then she looked back at Ethan. "You promise you won't try nothing bad? Mama's sick, but she's still got a rifle." "I promise." Another pause weighing him. Then, Old Hutchins' place, mile west of town, past the dried-up creek bed. Ethan stood. "I'll ride out there tomorrow morning. You make sure your mama knows I'm coming so she doesn't shoot me on sight." He turned to go, then stopped and pulled a $5 bill from his pocket, nearly half of what he had left. He held it out to Rosie. "Take this. Get more food. And get some shoes for those feet before they get infected." Rosie stared at the money like it was a snake. We can't just consider it payment in advance. If your mama's well enough, maybe she can do some sewing for me. I've got shirts that need mending." It was another thin excuse, but Rosie took it, her hand trembling as she accepted the bill. "Thank you, sir. Nobody's been this kind to us since Pa died." "What's your full name, child?" "Rosie Harper." "This is Tommy Harper." "Well, Rosie and Tommy Harper, my name's Ethan Cole, and I'll see you tomorrow morning." He left them in the alley and walked back toward the boarding house, his stomach still empty. His pocket considerably lighter, his mind already wondering what the hell he'd just committed himself to. But as he walked, he realized something. For the first time in 3 years, he had a reason to wake up tomorrow that wasn't just waiting for the next disaster. It wasn't much of a reason, but it was something. And in Wyoming in 1886, during the 3rd year of drought, sometimes something was enough. The sun was barely touching the horizon when Ethan saddled his horse the next morning, the sky still more gray than blue. He'd spent the night at the boarding house in a room that smelled like mildew and old tobacco, lying awake on a mattress that felt like sleeping on a sack of rocks. Every time he'd started to drift off, he'd see those children's faces, the hollow eyes, the bare feet, the careful way they'd rationed that bread, like it might be their last meal on earth. He'd paid Mrs. Henderson 75 cents for the room, and another quarter for breakfast eggs that tasted like the chicken had been dead a week, and coffee that could strip paint. That left him with a little over $5 to his name. $5 between him and complete ruin. His father would have called him 10 kinds of fool. His father would have been right. The ride west out of Casper took him past ranches that looked like his own dying or dead fences, sagging buildings starting to lean. The drought had teeth, and it was eating everything. 3 years without decent rain had turned the whole territory into a tinderbox waiting for a match. Cattle were selling for nothing because everyone was selling at once, and the big operations like Wade Langford's were buying up land for pennies on the dollar from men too desperate to argue. The dried creek bed Rosie had mentioned was easy to spot, a scar cutting through the landscape where water used to run. Ethan followed it west, and after about 20 minutes, he saw the shack. Calling it a shack was generous. It was barely standing 4 walls of weathered wood that had gone gray with age gaps between the boards wide enough to see through. The roof sagged in the middle like a broken back, half the shingles missing or hanging loose. No door, just a blanket nailed over the opening. One window with no glass, just an empty frame staring out like a dead eye. Ethan dismounted slowly, making noise so they'd hear him coming. "Hello, the house. It's Ethan Cole. I spoke with Rosie yesterday." The blanket moved and Rosie's face appeared eyes wide and wary. She looked him over, then glanced back inside before stepping out. In the daylight, he could see just how thin she was, her wrists like twigs, her neck barely thicker than his thumb. She'd used some of the money for food, though. He could see it in Tommy's face when the boy peeked out behind her, still painfully thin, but his eyes had more life in them than yesterday. "You came," Rosie said, and she sounded surprised. "Said I would." Ethan tied his horse to a post that looked like it might collapse if he breathed on it wrong. "Your mama awake?" "She's awake. But sir, I gotta tell you, she don't want charity. She's real proud about that. When I told her you were coming, she got upset, said we couldn't accept help from strangers." "I'm not offering charity. I'm offering to look at a sick woman and maybe help if I can. There's a difference." Rosie didn't look convinced, but she stepped aside and held the blanket up. "She might yell at you, just warning you." Ethan had to duck to get through the doorway. Inside the shack was even worse than outside. The floor was dirt, hard packed and dusty. There was no furniture except for a broken chair and what looked like a bed frame made from scrap lumber with a straw mattress on top. A few cooking pots sat by a cold fire pit. In the corner, a handful of clothes hung from nails driven into the wall. That was it. That was everything they owned in the world. On the bed lay a woman who might have been 30, but looked 50. Martha Harper had the same straw-colored hair as her daughter, but hers was matted with sweat and tangled on a flour sack that served as a pillow. Her face was fever-flushed, her lips cracked and bleeding. She tried to sit up when Ethan entered, but the effort sent her into a coughing fit that sounded like her lungs were tearing themselves apart. Blood flecked her lips when the coughing stopped. "Mrs. Harper," Ethan said quietly, "I'm Ethan Cole. I know who you are." Her voice was barely a whisper, rough as gravel. "Rosie told me. And I told her we don't need your help." "Mama," Rosie started, but Martha cut her off with a look. "We don't take charity, Mr. Cole. We work for what we get. That's how we were raised, and that's how I'm raising my children." Ethan crouched down beside the bed, looking at her straight on. "Ma'am, with respect, you're dying, and when you're gone, these children will have nothing and nobody. Now you can call it charity if that makes you feel better, but I call it common decency, and I'm not leaving until you let me help." Martha's eyes blazed with anger, despite the fever burning through her. "You think I don't know I'm dying? You think I haven't been lying here every night trying to figure out what happens to Rosie and Tommy when I'm gone? I know exactly what kind of world this is, Mr. Cole. I know what happens to children with no family and no money." Her voice dropped lower. "Especially to girls who look like Rosie." The implication hit Ethan like a fist. He glanced at Rosie, saw her looking at the floor, saw the way she unconsciously pulled her sleeves down to cover her arms. Those bruises. "Who's been hurting your daughter, Mrs. Harper?" Martha's jaw tightened. Don't matter. Won't be a problem much longer. The hell it won't. Who? I said it don't matter. Ethan stood up, anger rising in his chest like a hot tide. Was it Wade Langford? The name landed like a stone in still water. Martha's eyes went wide, then quickly shuddered, but that moment of recognition was enough. Langford comes by here, Ethan demanded. Mr. Cole, I think you should leave. Does he hurt these children? Leave, now. Not until you tell me she told you to leave. Tommy's small voice cut through the tension. The boy had moved to stand beside his mother's bed, his small fists clenched at his sides. You should go. Ethan looked at the kid, all of 6 years old, weighing maybe 40 pounds, soaking wet, standing there ready to fight a full-grown man to protect his dying mother. The courage of it, the desperate foolishness of it made Ethan's throat tight. All right, he said quietly. I'll go, but I'm leaving these with you. He pulled a small cloth bag from his coat pocket and set it on the broken chair. Inside were the supplies he'd bought that morning, with money he couldn't afford to spend willow bark for fever, dried mint for the cough-clean bandages, a small bottle of laudanum that had cost him 50 cents at the pharmacy. I don't want... Martha started. They're not for you, Ethan interrupted. They're for Rosie and Tommy, because when you're gone, they're going to need to know how to care for sick people. Consider it educational supplies. It was a flimsy excuse, and everyone in the room knew it, but it gave Martha a way to accept without breaking her pride. She stared at the bag for a long moment, then looked at Ethan with eyes that held something like grudging respect. You're a stubborn man, Mr. Cole. Yes, ma'am, I've been told that before. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Mrs. Harper, I need you to understand something. I've got almost nothing left in this world. My ranch is dying. I just sold my last cow, and I'm maybe 2 months from losing everything my father built. But I've still got more than you and your children have. And if I can help, I'm going to. You can be proud about it all you want, but that won't change my mind. He left before she could argue, stepping out into the morning sun that was already starting to heat the air. Rosie followed him outside, the blanket falling closed behind her. Thank you, she said quietly, for the medicine. For everything. Your mama's proud. I respect that. Ethan untied his horse. But Rosie, I need you to tell me true. Is Wade Langford hurting you? Her face went carefully blank, the same expression he'd seen on soldiers during the war when they were asked about things too terrible to speak. Mr. Langford owns our old house, the one we lived in before Mama got sick. He raises the rent sometimes, that's all. That's all. Yes, sir. She was lying. He could see it in the way she wouldn't meet his eyes, in the tension in her shoulders, in how her hand unconsciously went to her arm where those bruises had been. But he also knew that pushing wouldn't help. Whatever was happening, she wasn't ready to talk about it. All right, he said, but if you or Tommy ever need help, real help, the kind that can't wait, you come find me. My ranch is about 5 miles southeast of town, the old Cole place. Anyone can point you there, you understand? Yes, sir. I mean it, Rosie, day or night. You come running if you need to. Yes, sir. She paused. Are you really about to lose your ranch? Looks that way. Because of the drought, partly because of other things. He swung up into the saddle. You take care of your mama. Use that medicine. The willow bark for fever, steep it in hot water like tea. The mint for the cough. The laudanum only if the pain gets too bad, and only a few drops at a time. You hear me. I hear you. She bit her lip. Mr. Cole, why are you helping us? Real reason. Ethan looked at her, this 8-year-old girl with too much responsibility and not enough childhood, standing barefoot in the dirt outside a shack that wasn't fit for animals, taking care of a dying mother and a starving brother. He thought about all the reasons he could give. Because it was the right thing to do. Because his father had taught him to help people in need. Because he'd seen too much death and couldn't stomach seeing more. But the truth was simpler and harder than any of that. Because I can't not help, he said finally. And I know that doesn't make a lick of sense, but it's the truth. Rosie nodded slowly, like that answer satisfied something in her. I'll pray for your ranch, Mr. Cole. I'll pray God sends you rain." "I appreciate that, miss. Though I think God's been a little busy elsewhere lately." He rode away before the moment could get any heavier, heading back toward town with $5 in his pocket and a sick feeling in his gut that he'd just stepped into something bigger than he understood. The ride back took him past the turnoff to his own ranch, and on impulse, he took it. Maybe he was punishing himself, or maybe he just needed to see it one more time before it was gone. Either way, 20 minutes later he was sitting on his horse, looking at everything his father had built. The ranch house stood solid. His father had built things to last. 2 stories good, timber, a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. But the barn was starting to lean, missing boards in the walls. The corral fence had posts rotting at the base. The fields stretched out brown and dead cracked earth where wheat used to grow tall enough to hide a man on horseback. The creek that ran along the property line was dry as bone and would stay that way until the rains came back, if they came back. Ethan sat there for a long time, remembering what it used to look like. Cattle grazing in the near pasture, crops waving green in the fields, his father on the porch in the evening smoking his pipe, satisfied with a hard day's work, his mother hanging laundry on the line, singing hymns in her clear voice, his sister chasing chickens in the yard, laughing when they scattered. All gone now. His parents dead within 6 months of each other, fever taking them both. His sister gone 5 years before that, the same fever, just him left watching everything turn to dust. He was about to ride on when he noticed the tracks, fresh ones leading from the road up to his house. Horse tracks, maybe from yesterday or the day before. Someone had been here while he was in town. Ethan urged his horse forward, following the tracks. They went straight to the house, circled around back, then headed toward the creek, or what used to be the creek. That's when he saw it. The creek bed had been dug out recently, fresh earth piled on both sides, the work of shovels and maybe a plow. Following the line of disturbed ground, Ethan saw where it led upstream toward the north, toward Wade Langford's property. His hands tightened on the reins. He'd noticed the creek drying up over the past year, had assumed it was just the drought like everything else. But this was deliberate. Someone had diverted the water, cutting off the flow that fed his land. Ethan dismounted and walked along the dry creek bed, his boots crunching on the parched ground. About 100 yards upstream, he found where the diversion started. A crude dam made of rocks and mud directing the water into a new channel that ran north. And carved into one of the rocks, barely visible unless you were looking for it, were 2 initials, W.L. Wade Langford. The rage that filled Ethan was different from anything he'd felt in years. This wasn't anger about losing a cow or going hungry. This was colder, harder. His ranch hadn't died from drought. It had been murdered, slowly, deliberately, by a man who wanted the land for himself. He was still standing there staring at those initials when he heard hoofbeats behind him. He turned to see 3 riders approaching Wade Langford himself. In the lead, flanked by 2 men Ethan recognized as Langford's hired muscle, Bull Carson and Pete Sykes, both with reputations for violence and a flexible relationship with the law. Langford pulled up about 20 feet away, that same cold smile on his face that Ethan had seen through the store window yesterday. Up close, the man looked even more like a snake, narrow face, slicked back hair, eyes that watched everything and gave away nothing. "Ethan Cole," Langford said, like they were old friends meeting by chance. "Didn't expect to find you here. Heard you were in town selling off livestock." "My land, Langford. I can be here if I want." "Your land." Langford looked around, making a show of it. "For now, anyway, though I have to say it's looking pretty rough. Shame what the drought's done to this place." "Drought." Ethan kept his voice level. "That what you're calling it?" "What else would I call it?" Langford's smile didn't waver. "Haven't been any rain in 3 years. Everybody's suffering. Everybody except you. Funny how your fields are still green while everyone else's are dying. Good water management, Ethan, that's all. A man's got to plan ahead in this country." Ethan gestured to the dam. This your idea of planning ahead?" Langford's smile finally faded. "That dam's on my property. Water rights are complicated in Wyoming territory. A smart man secures his resources by stealing from your neighbors." Careful with words like stealing Ethan. That's a serious accusation. Bull Carson shifted in his saddle, one hand dropping casually to the gun on his hip. "Especially when you can't prove anything." "I can prove you diverted the creek." "Can you?" Langford's smile returned. "Because I've got documents showing that creek's headwaters originate on my land, which means the water's mine to use as I see fit. You want to argue about it, we can take it to the territorial court in Cheyenne. Of course, that'll cost money for lawyers, and from what I hear, you're about broke." He wasn't wrong. A court case would cost hundreds of dollars Ethan didn't have, and would take months or years to resolve. By then, the ranch would be long gone. "You know what I think?" Langford continued, his voice taking on a reasonable tone that was somehow more threatening than anger. "I think you're looking for someone to blame for your own poor decisions. You overextended yourself, didn't plan for hard times, and now you're paying the price. That's not my fault, Ethan. That's just poor ranching. You son of a... Langford held up a hand. "Before you say something you'll regret. Let me make you an offer. I'll buy this place from you, give you a fair price enough to relocate somewhere with better prospects. You could start over, make something of yourself. Fair price, like the fair rent you charged Martha Harper." Something flickered in Langford's eyes, recognition, wariness, and something else. Something that looked like ownership. Martha Harper's situation is unfortunate, but she signed a contract, same as anyone. When she couldn't fulfill her obligations, there were consequences. That's how business works. Her husband died, she got sick. Those aren't business decisions. No, they're tragedies, but the world doesn't stop turning because of tragedy, Ethan. Bills still come due, rent still needs to be paid. Langford leaned forward in his saddle. "You know what the real tragedy is, those children. Sweet little Rosie trying so hard to take care of her baby brother. She's going to need someone to look after her when her mother passes. Someone with resources, connections." The implication was clear, and it made Ethan's skin crawl. "You stay away from those kids." "Or what?" Langford's voice went cold. "You'll stop me. You can't even save your own ranch, and you think you can protect some beggar children. Face it, Ethan, you're finished. This land will be mine by winter one way or another. You can sell it to me now and walk away with something, or you can wait for the bank to take it and walk away with nothing. Your choice. I'll see you in hell first." Langford sighed like Ethan was being unreasonable. "Have it your way, but when you're sleeping in the street come December, don't say I didn't warn you." He touched his hat in mock courtesy. "Gentlemen, let's go. We've wasted enough time here." The three of them rode off, and Ethan watched them go with his jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. When they were out of sight, he walked back to the dam and started pulling it apart with his bare hands, throwing rocks and mud aside. It took him an hour to clear enough of the channel that water started trickling through again. Not much, the creek was low from the drought, but something. It wouldn't save his ranch. The damage was already done. But it felt good to destroy something Langford had built, even something small. By the time he finished, his hands were bleeding and the sun was high overhead. He rode back to town with his mind churning, trying to find a way out of the trap closing around him. He had maybe $5 left. No cattle, no crops, winter coming, and now Wade Langford circling like a vulture waiting for him to fall. He should have been thinking about himself, about survival, about what came next. Instead, he kept seeing Rosie's face, hearing Langford's voice, talking about her like she was property waiting to be claimed. Kept thinking about Martha Harper dying in that shack with no one to protect her children. The smart thing would be to walk away, take whatever Langford offered, get out of Wyoming, start over somewhere else, save himself. But Ethan had never been particularly smart. He was halfway back to town when he made his decision. He didn't have much, but he had a house with a roof that didn't leak and walls that kept the wind out. He had empty bedrooms that hadn't been used since his family died. He had enough pride left to share what little he had. Tomorrow he'd go back to that shack. He'd talk to Martha Harper again, and this time he wouldn't take no for an answer. Those children needed a place to stay before winter came, and by God, he'd give them one, even if it meant losing everything else. Even if it made him the biggest fool in Wyoming. Some things he was learning mattered more than being smart. But Martha Harper had other ideas. When Ethan rode back to the shack the next morning, he found her sitting outside on an overturned crate, a rifle across her lap. She looked like death warmed over face gray, as old newspaper hands trembling even as they gripped the gun, but her eyes were sharp and clear. "Mr. Cole," she said when he dismounted, "I figured you'd be back." "Mrs. Harper," he kept his distance, eyeing the rifle. "That gun loaded, every bullet I got left, all 3 of them." She coughed a wet rattling sound, then spat blood into the dirt. "Don't worry, I'm not fixing to shoot you, just making a point." "What point's that?" "That I may be dying, but I'm not dead yet, and I'm still the one making decisions about my children." She gestured to the ground in front of her. "Sit down. We need to talk." Ethan sat, keeping his hands visible, non-threatening. Up close, he could see she'd gotten worse overnight. The fever was burning through her like wildfire, consuming everything it touched. She had days left, maybe a week if she was strong, not longer. "Rosie told me what you said yesterday," Martha began, "about giving us a place to stay, about your empty bedrooms and your roof that doesn't leak." "Yes, ma'am. And I'm guessing you came back to try again to convince me to accept your charity." "I came back to make you see sense," Ethan said bluntly. "Ma'am, with respect, your pride is going to kill your children. When you die, and you are dying, we both know it, what happens to Rosie and Tommy. You think this town's going to take them in? You think anybody's going to care what happens to 2 orphans with no money and no family?" Martha's jaw tightened. "I know exactly what happens to children like mine. Rosie gets taken by a man like Wade Langford who'll use her up and throw her away before she's 15. Tommy ends up in an orphanage or working in some mine dead before he's 20. You think I haven't been lying awake every night thinking about it? Then accept my help." "I can't." Her voice cracked. "Don't you understand? I can't just hand my children over to a stranger and hope for the best. How do I know you're not like Langford? How do I know you won't hurt them, won't use them, won't—" She broke off, coughing again. Ethan waited until the coughing passed. "You don't know. You can't know. All you can do is look at me and decide if you trust me or not." "Trust?" Martha laughed, a bitter sound. "I trusted my husband to keep us safe, and he died. I trusted that if I worked hard, I could provide for my children, and I got sick. I trusted Wade Langford when he said he'd give me more time to pay the rent, and he—" She stopped abruptly. "He what?" Martha looked away. "Doesn't matter? It does matter. What did Langford do?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the horizon, where heat was already making the air shimmer. When she spoke again, her voice was flat, emotionless, the way people talked about things too painful to feel. "He said if I couldn't pay in money, I could pay other ways. Said a woman like me, still young enough, still pretty enough, I could work off the debt doing favors for him and his friends." She turned to look at Ethan. "I said no. Told him I'd rather starve." That's when he grabbed Rosie, held her by the arm so hard he left bruises, said if I wouldn't cooperate, maybe my daughter would when she got a little older. The rage that filled Ethan was like a physical thing, hot and choking. He threatened everything that matters," Martha interrupted, "and there was nothing I could do. No law in this territory that cares about what happens to poor women and their children. No one who'd take my word over his. So I took the kids and we left in the middle of the night. Been hiding in this shack ever since, hoping he'd forget about us." "Has he forgotten?" Martha's silence was answer enough. "He comes by," Ethan said. It wasn't a question. "Once a week, usually. Brings food sometimes, like he's being generous. Talks to Rosie, asks her questions, touches her hair." Martha's hands tightened on the rifle. "I stay awake those nights, this gun in my lap, ready to shoot him if he tries anything. But he's patient. He knows I'm dying. He's just waiting." Ethan felt something cold settle in his chest. Mrs. Harper, if you don't let me help, Langford wins. Is that what you want? Of course it's not what I want. Her voice rose, cracking with emotion. You think I want that monster anywhere near my children, but how do I know you're any better? How do I know this isn't just another trap? You don't, Ethan said quietly, but here's what I can tell you. My sister was about Rosie's age when she died. Sarah. Fever took her when she was 9. I'd give anything, everything to have her back. I can't have Sarah, but I can help Rosie and Tommy. Not because I want something from you, not because I expect anything in return, because it's the right thing to do, and because I'm tired of watching people suffer when I might be able to stop it. Martha studied his face for a long time, searching for something. You got any money left, Mr. Cole? About $4, and your ranch is failing. Yes, ma'am. So you're offering to take in 2 children you don't know, feed them, clothe them, keep them safe, all while you're going broke yourself. That about sums it up. You're either a saint or a fool. I'm definitely not a saint. A ghost of a smile touched Martha's lips. Then the smile faded, replaced by something harder. If I agree to this, and I'm not saying I am, there would be conditions. Name them. First, you don't lay a hand on my children. Not in anger, not in any other way. You got a problem with their behavior. You talk to them like human beings. Agreed. Second, Rosie keeps going to school when it starts up again in the fall. I don't care how much work there is on the ranch, she gets her education. Agreed. Third, if Wade Langford or any of his men come around, you protect my children. I don't care what it costs you. I don't care what you have to do. You keep them safe. Ethan met her eyes. Mrs. Harper, I promise you on my parents' graves, Wade Langford will never touch your children while I'm breathing, and if he tries, he'll regret it. Something in his voice must have convinced her, because Martha's shoulders sagged with relief and exhaustion. All right then, all right, they can stay with you. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. She coughed again, harder this time, doubling over. When she straightened, there was more blood on her lips. I need you to understand something, Mr. Cole. Those children in there, they're everything good I've ever done in this world. Everything that matters. You take them on, you're responsible for more than just feeding and housing them. You're responsible for who they become, what kind of people they grow into. That's a weight that doesn't go away. I understand. I don't think you do, but you will. Martha struggled to her feet, using the rifle as a cane. Help me inside. I need to talk to them. Ethan took her arm. She weighed almost nothing, like she was already halfway to being a ghost, and helped her through the blanket door. Inside, Rosie was kneeling by the fire pit, trying to coax heat from damp wood. Tommy sat on the floor next to her, playing with a stick and some pebbles. They both looked up when their mother entered, and Rosie was on her feet immediately. Mama, you shouldn't be up. You need to rest. I'll rest soon enough, baby. Right now I need you and Tommy to listen. Martha lowered herself onto the bed with Ethan's help, then gestured for the children to come closer. Mr. Cole has offered to let you stay at his ranch. I've decided you should go. Rosie's eyes went wide. What? No, Mama, we can't leave you. You're not leaving me. I'm coming with you for as long as I can. Martha reached out and took both children's hands. But when I'm gone, I need to know you'll be safe. Mr. Cole has a real house with real walls and a real roof. He'll make sure you have food and clothes and everything you need. We don't need anything, Rosie said fiercely. We got you. That's all we need. Oh, honey. Martha pulled her daughter close, and Ethan saw tears on both their faces. I wish that was enough. I wish I could stay with you forever, but I can't. This sickness is eating me up inside, and there's no stopping it. So you're going to have to be brave for me. Can you do that? Rosie was crying openly now, her small body shaking. I don't want to be brave. I want you to get better. I know, baby, I know. Martha looked at Tommy, who had gone very quiet, his face pale. Tommy, you understand what's happening? The boy nodded slowly. You're dying, like Pa. Yes, like Pa. Martha's voice broke. But I need you to promise me something, both of you. Promise me you'll look after each other no matter what. Promise me you'll be good for Mr. Cole, and you'll work hard, and you'll make something of yourselves. Can you promise me that?" "I promise," Rosie whispered. "Tommy, I promise Mama." "Good, that's good." Martha held them both for a moment, then looked at Ethan over their heads. "We'll need a few hours to pack our things, such as they are." "Take your time," Ethan said. "I'll wait outside." He stepped back through the blanket door into the sunlight, giving them privacy for their grief. He could hear crying inside, quiet and wrenching, and it took everything he had not to mount his horse and ride away from this whole situation. He'd come here planning to help, and somehow he'd ended up taking responsibility for 2 children, one of whom would be orphaned within days. What the hell was he thinking? But even as the doubt crept in, he knew he couldn't back out now. He'd made a promise to a dying woman, and some promises were too sacred to break. An hour later, Martha emerged with the children. Between them, they carried one small bundle of clothes and a few cooking pots. That was everything. Their entire lives fit in a flour sack and a dented pot. Ethan had brought the wagon this time instead of just his horse, figuring Martha would need to lie down for the trip. He'd put straw in the back and covered it with the one good blanket he owned. He helped Martha climb up, and she collapsed onto the makeshift bed with a groan of pain. "Rosie, Tommy, climb on up," Ethan said. The children obeyed silently, settling in next to their mother. Rosie held her rag doll clutched tight to her chest, and Tommy kept one hand on his mother's arm like he was afraid she'd disappear if he let go. The ride back to the ranch took almost 2 hours, going slow to avoid jostling Martha too much. She drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring things Ethan couldn't hear. Rosie sat beside her the whole way, wiping her mother's face with a damp cloth, whispering reassurances. When they finally pulled up in front of the ranch house, the sun was starting to sink toward the horizon, painting everything gold and orange. Ethan climbed down and helped Martha out of the wagon. She could barely stand, so he picked her up and carried her inside, the children following close behind. The house was cool and dark after the heat outside. Ethan had cleaned it the night before, swept the floors, and opened the windows to air it out. It wasn't much. The furniture was worn, the walls needed paint. Everything had a layer of dust that came from living alone and not caring, but it was solid, safe. He carried Martha upstairs to his parents' old bedroom, the one he'd kept closed since they died. The bed was still made with his mother's quilts. The dresser still held his father's pocket watch. It smelled like memory and loss. "This room," Martha whispered as he laid her on the bed. "It's too nice, I can't." "You can and you will," Ethan said firmly. "Rosie, there's a room across the hall that can be yours. Tommy, there's one next to it. You both go pick which one you want and start settling in." The children hesitated, looking to their mother. Martha nodded weakly, and they went, their footsteps soft on the old floorboards. Ethan started to leave to give Martha privacy, but her hand shot out and grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "Mr. Cole, when I'm gone, don't talk about that now. You need to rest. Listen to me." Her eyes were fierce despite the fever burning in them. "When I'm gone, you bury me proper. Nothing fancy, but proper, with a marker that has my name and my children's names so they know where to find me. Can you do that?" "I can." "And you tell them," her voice caught, "you tell them their mama loved them more than anything in this world. Tell them I fought as hard as I could to stay. Tell them—" She broke off, coughing. Ethan waited until the coughing subsided. "I'll tell them, I promise." "Good." She released his wrist and closed her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Cole, for giving them a chance. That's all a mother can ask for." He left her to sleep and went downstairs, his heart heavy. In the kitchen, he found Rosie trying to figure out the stove, which was more complicated than the open fire pit she was used to. "Here," he said gently, "let me show you." He taught her how to work the damper and where to put the kindling, and together they got a fire going. There wasn't much food in the house. He'd been living on beans and cornmeal for weeks, but he made what he could. Beans with a little salt pork cornbread that came out dry but edible. It wasn't a feast, but it was hot, and there was enough for seconds. They ate in silence around the kitchen table, the children too overwhelmed to speak. When they finished, Rosie started clearing the dishes without being asked, and Tommy tried to help despite being so tired he could barely keep his eyes open. "Leave it," Ethan said. "I'll clean up. You two should get some sleep." "I need to check on Mama first," Rosie said. They went upstairs together, all three of them. Martha was awake, though her breathing had gotten worse, more labored. Rosie sat on the edge of the bed and took her mother's hand. "We had supper, Mama. Real food on a real table." "That's good, baby." Martha's voice was fading. "You eat all you wanted." "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Cole made plenty." "Good, that's real good." Martha's eyes found Ethan in the doorway. "Mr. Cole, would you give us a few minutes?" "Of course." He stepped back into the hall, but he could still hear them through the open door. "Rosie, honey, I need you to listen," Martha was saying. "Things are going to get hard. You're going to have to grow up faster than any child should. But I need you to remember something. You're stronger than you know. You take care of Tommy, and you take care of yourself, and you don't let anyone make you feel small. You understand?" "Yes, Mama." "And Tommy, my sweet boy, you listen to your sister. She's going to look after you now. You be good for Mr. Cole, and you work hard, and you grow up to be a man your pa would be proud of." "I will, Mama. I love you both so much, more than all the stars in the sky." Martha's voice was barely a whisper now. "Don't forget me." "Never," Rosie said fiercely. "Never, ever." Ethan heard crying, then soft and broken, and he had to turn away. He went downstairs and sat on the porch, staring out at the darkening fields, wondering what he'd gotten himself into, and knowing there was no turning back now. 3 days later, Martha Harper died. She went in her sleep just before dawn, while Rosie was sitting beside her holding her hand. Ethan had been downstairs making coffee when he heard the scream. A sound of grief so pure and terrible it made his chest hurt. He found Rosie on the bed, clutching her mother's body, rocking back and forth and making sounds that weren't quite words. Tommy stood in the doorway, frozen, his face blank with shock. Ethan had to physically pull Rosie away from the body, and she fought him, hitting and kicking and screaming that her mama was just sleeping. She'd wake up. She had to wake up. It took a long time to calm her down, and even then she kept trying to go back to the room. He buried Martha that afternoon on a hill overlooking the ranch, in a spot where wildflowers grew in the spring. He'd bought a simple wooden cross in town and carved her name into it himself. Martha Harper, beloved mother. He didn't have money for a real headstone, but he promised himself he'd get one someday. The children stood beside the grave holding hands while Ethan said a few words. He wasn't religious, but he tried his best, talking about how Martha had loved her children and fought for them until her last breath, how she'd been brave and strong, even when the world tried to break her. When he finished, Rosie stepped forward and placed her rag doll on the fresh-turned earth. "For Mama," she whispered, "so she won't be lonely." Tommy put down the stick he'd been playing with, the one with the pebbles, his offering. They stood there until the sun started to set, 3 people bound together by grief and necessity, trying to figure out how to keep moving forward when everything felt broken. That night, Ethan heard crying from Rosie's room. He knocked softly on the door. "Go away," she said, her voice thick with tears. "Can't do that. It's my house." He opened the door anyway and found her curled up on the bed, her face buried in the pillow. He sat down on the edge of the mattress. "I know it hurts. I know it feels like the pain will never stop, but it will get easier. Not better, I won't lie to you, but easier." "I want my mama," Rosie sobbed. "I want her back." "I know. I wanted my mama back too when she died. Wanted it so bad I thought I'd die from wanting." Ethan put a hand on her shoulder. "But she's not coming back, Rosie, and we have to find a way to keep going anyway, for Tommy, for your mama's memory, for ourselves. I don't know how. Neither do I, but we'll figure it out together." She turned to look at him, then her face streaked with tears, her eyes red and swollen. "You promise you won't send us away, even if we're too much trouble?" "I promise." "You promise you won't let Mr. Langford take us?" "I promise that too." On my life." She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded and turned back to the pillow. Ethan sat there until her breathing evened out and she fell asleep. Then he went downstairs and poured himself a drink of whiskey from the bottle he kept for emergencies. This definitely qualified as an emergency. He was sitting on the porch watching the stars come out when he heard a horse approaching. His hand went instinctively to the rifle leaning against the wall beside him. These days, nothing good came riding up after dark. The rider emerged from the darkness and Ethan felt his jaw clench when he recognized Wade Langford's silhouette against the starlight. Langford pulled up at the edge of the porch, staying mounted, keeping his hands visible. Smart man. He knew Ethan had a rifle and a reason to use it. "Heard Martha Harper died," Langford said without preamble. "Heard you took in her children. That true? It's true." "Interesting. Didn't take you for the charitable type, Cole." "There's a lot you don't know about me, Langford." "Apparently." Langford shifted in his saddle. "I'm here to make you an offer. For the children." Every muscle in Ethan's body went tight. "They're not for sale. I'm not trying to buy them. I'm offering to take them off your hands. Find them proper homes. The boy could work at my ranch, learn a trade. The girl, well, I'm sure we could find something suitable for her." The way he said suitable made Ethan's skin crawl. The answer's no. "You sure about that? Because feeding 2 extra mouths when you can barely feed yourself seems like poor planning. I'd be doing you a favor." "I don't need your favors. Everyone needs something, Cole." Langford's voice hardened. "You're broke, your ranch is dying, and now you've got 2 children to care for. How long do you think you can keep this up?" "A month, 2. What happens when winter comes and you can't afford firewood, when those kids are hungry and cold and you've got nothing to give them?" "That's my problem, not yours. It becomes my problem when those children suffer because of your pride." Langford leaned forward. "I'm trying to help here. Let me take them. They'll be fed, clothed, warm. Isn't that better than watching them starve slowly while you cling to some misguided sense of responsibility?" Ethan stood up, rifle in hand, but pointed at the ground. "Get off my land, Langford, and don't come back. You're making a mistake." "Probably. I'm good at that." Ethan raised the rifle slightly, not quite pointing it, but making his intention clear. "Now get." Langford stared at him for a long moment, then smiled that cold smile. "All right, Cole, have it your way. But when those kids are crying from hunger this winter when they're sick, and you can't afford medicine, when they're looking at you wondering why you won't let someone help them, remember this conversation. Remember that I offered and you said no." He wheeled his horse around and rode off into the darkness, and Ethan stood there on the porch until the hoofbeats faded completely. Then he sat down and finished his whiskey, in one long swallow, his hands shaking. Because Langford wasn't wrong. Ethan had about $3 left to his name. No cattle, no crops, no income. Winter was 4 months away. He had no idea how he was going to feed himself, let alone 2 growing children, but he'd made a promise to a dying woman, and he'd made a promise to those kids upstairs. And if there was one thing Ethan Cole still had, it was his word, even if keeping it killed him. The first hard freeze came in early November, 6 weeks after Martha Harper was buried on the hill. Ethan woke to find ice coating the inside of the windows and his breath fogging in the bedroom. Downstairs, he could hear Rosie already moving around getting the stove going. The girl had taken to ranch life with a determination that was both impressive and heartbreaking. She was trying so hard to prove they weren't a burden that she worked herself raw every day. Ethan dressed quickly, his fingers stiff with cold, and went down to find her kneeling by the stove, feeding it kindling. Tommy sat at the table wrapped in a blanket, his nose red from the chill. "Morning," Ethan said. "Morning, Mr. Cole." Rosie didn't look up from the stove. "I'm making porridge. We got enough oats for maybe 3 more days if we're careful." 3 days. Ethan had been avoiding thinking about the numbers, but they were inescapable now. He had $1.67 left. The pantry held oats, some dried beans, a small sack of flour, and not much else. The chickens he'd bought last month were laying eggs, but barely enough to matter. The garden had yielded some vegetables before the frost killed it, and Rosie had done her best to preserve what she could, but it wasn't enough. Nothing was ever enough. "We'll manage," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Yes, sir." Rosie finally looked at him, and her eyes were older than they should be. "Mr. Cole, I've been thinking, maybe I could find work in town. Mrs. Chen at the restaurant said she might need help washing dishes, and Tommy's strong for his age. He could—" "No." Ethan's voice came out harder than he intended. "You're 8 years old, Rosie. You should be in school, not working. School starts next week, but we can't afford the books. You said so yourself." He had said that 3 days ago when she'd asked about it. The school required students to provide their own readers and slates, and Ethan didn't have the money for either. The shame of it still burned in his chest, failing these children before he'd barely started. "We'll figure something out," he said. "That's what you always say." There was no accusation in her tone, just weariness. "But we're running out of time to figure, Mr. Cole. Mama always said you can't eat hope." The truth of it hit him like a fist. He turned away, pretending to check the coffee pot, not wanting her to see his face. Behind him he heard her stirring the porridge, the scrape of the spoon against the pot, rhythmic and familiar. "I'm going into town today," he said finally. "See if anyone needs the work done. Carpentry, hauling, anything. You went yesterday and the day before that. I'll try again." "Mr. Cole." "I said I'll handle it, Rosie." He didn't mean to snap, but the pressure of everything was like a vice tightening around his skull. "You just worry about being a child for a while longer." She went quiet after that, and they ate breakfast in silence, thin porridge that barely filled the bowl, shared 3 ways. Tommy ate slowly, making it last, and Ethan noticed the boy had gotten thinner despite everything. They all had. He could feel his own belt notched tighter, his shirts hanging looser. After breakfast, Ethan saddled his horse and rode toward Casper, leaving the children with instructions to stay warm and not answer the door for anyone. The ride took 40 minutes, and every minute of it he spent trying to figure out how to make money appear out of thin air. Town was quiet when he arrived, most people already at work or hunkered down against the cold. Ethan made his usual rounds, the livery stable, the general store, the feed shop, anywhere someone might need an extra hand. But November was a lean month, and everyone was cutting costs, not hiring. At the livery, old Tom shook his head before Ethan even finished asking. "Sorry, Ethan, got nothing. Business is slow." At the feed shop, the answer was the same. "Wish I could help you out, but I'm barely keeping my own boy fed." The general store was his last stop. Mr. Patterson was behind the counter tallying receipts with a pencil stub. He looked up when Ethan entered, and something like pity crossed his face before he could hide it. "Ethan, what can I do for you?" "I'm looking for work, any kind. I can do carpentry, hauling, bookkeeping if you need it, anything at all." Patterson sucked his teeth, considering. "I don't have regular work, but I could use some help moving freight next week when the wagon comes in. Pay you $1 for the day." $1 for a full day's back-breaking work. It was insulting, and they both knew it, but Ethan couldn't afford pride. "I'll take it." "Good. Come by Tuesday morning." Ethan turned to leave, then stopped. On the counter was a newspaper, the Cheyenne Daily Leader, 2 days old. The headline caught his eye: "Territorial Legislature Debates Water Rights Reform." "Can I look at that?" he asked, pointing to the paper. Patterson shrugged. "Help yourself. Yesterday's news anyway." Ethan picked it up and scanned the article. It was about a proposed law that would regulate water usage across Wyoming territory, requiring permits for any diversion or dam construction. It mentioned disputes between ranchers, talked about the need for documentation and legal claims. Documentation, legal claims. His mind started working, turning over possibilities. Martha Harper had mentioned something before she died, something about papers she'd kept. He'd been too focused on her illness to pay attention. But now, Mr. Patterson, if someone diverted water illegally, what would they need to prove it? Patterson looked up from his receipts. Proof of original water rights, I suppose. Survey documents showing where the creek originally ran. Witness testimony, if you could get it. Why, just curious. Ethan folded the paper carefully. Can I borrow this? I'll bring it back. Keep it. Like I said, it's old news. Patterson's eyes narrowed. You thinking about going after Langford for that creek diversion? Word traveled fast in small towns. Ethan shouldn't have been surprised everyone knew about it. Just thinking, Ethan said carefully. Well, think real careful. Wade Langford's got money for lawyers and friends in the territorial government. You got neither. Man like you goes up against a man like him, you're gonna lose. Probably. Ethan tucked the newspaper inside his coat, but I appreciate the advice. He left before Patterson could say anything else and headed for the saloon. Not to drink, he couldn't afford it, but because that's where men gathered and talked, and sometimes talk led to opportunities. The saloon was dim and smoky, smelling of whiskey and unwashed bodies. A few men sat at tables playing cards or nursing drinks. Ethan recognized most of them ranchers like himself, most doing poorly, some doing worse. He bought the cheapest beer they had, 5 cents he couldn't spare, and sat down at a table near the window. For a while, he just listened to the conversations around him. Talk of cattle prices, weather predictions, complaints about the territorial government, normal saloon conversation. Then he heard Langford's name. 2 men at the next table were talking in low voices, but not low enough. Ethan caught fragments, heard he bought the Morrison place, paid half what it's worth. Family had no choice, bank was foreclosing. The Morrison place. That was the 4th property Langford had acquired in as many months. A pattern was emerging, one Ethan had been too focused on his own problems to see clearly before. Langford wasn't just buying land, he was systematically taking over the whole region, squeezing out anyone who couldn't fight back. And Ethan's ranch would be next if he couldn't find a way to stop it. He was finishing his beer when the saloon door opened and Wade Langford himself walked in, flanked by Bull Carson and Pete Sykes. The conversation in the room didn't exactly stop, but it got quieter, more careful. Langford had that effect on people. Langford's eyes swept the room and landed on Ethan. For a moment, neither man moved. Then Langford smiled and walked over his boots, loud on the wooden floor. Ethan Cole, didn't expect to see you here. Thought you'd be home with those children you took in. They're fine where they are. Ethan kept his voice level. I'm sure they are. Langford pulled out a chair and sat down without being invited, Carson and Sykes taking positions behind him like guard dogs. How are they adjusting? Must be quite a change from that shack. They're adjusting fine. Good, that's good. Langford leaned back in his chair, relaxed and confident. I've been thinking about your situation, Ethan, about the offer I made for your ranch, the one you turned down. Still turning it down. Hear me out. I'm prepared to be generous. $1,500 for your land and buildings. That's more than fair given the current market. It was more than fair. It was actually generous, which made Ethan immediately suspicious. Why the sudden increase? Because I'm a businessman and I see opportunity. Your land connects to my northern holdings. Having it would streamline my operations. Langford spread his hands. Plus, I hate to see a man struggle, especially one trying to do right by 2 orphans. $1,500 would set you up somewhere else, somewhere with better prospects. You could give those children a real future instead of watching them slowly starve on a dying ranch. The worst part was that Langford was right. $1,500 was more money than Ethan had seen in years. It could buy passage to California or Oregon, could set him up with a small business, could feed and clothe Rosie and Tommy properly. It was the smart choice, the sensible choice. It was also surrender. Not interested, Ethan said. Langford's smile faded. You're being foolish. Winter's coming. You've got maybe enough money to last another week, too, if you're lucky. What happens when the food runs out? When those kids are crying from hunger and you've got nothing to give them. That's my concern, not yours. It becomes my concern when children suffer because of adult stubbornness. Langford's voice took on an edge. I could report you to the territorial authorities. Tell them you're unable to provide for those children. They'd take them away, put them in an orphanage, or find them proper homes. Ethan's hand curled into a fist under the table. You do that, and You'll what? Langford leaned forward. Fight me. You can't afford a lawyer. Challenge me to a gunfight. I've got witnesses who'll swear you threatened me first. Face it, Cole, you're beaten. The honorable thing now is to accept reality and do what's best for those children. Every word was designed to cut, and every word hit home because there was truth in them. Ethan was beaten at least by conventional measures. He had no money, no prospects, no way forward. That didn't involve watching the children he'd promised to protect go hungry. But he'd been beaten before. During the war, he'd been in situations where surrender was the only logical option, where any sane man would have given up. And yet he'd survived by being too stubborn to die when he was supposed to. Maybe stubbornness was all he had left. I'll tell you what, Langford. Ethan stood up, looking down at the man. You want my ranch so bad you're going to have to take it the hard way. Through the courts, through the bank, whatever. But I'm not selling to you. Not for 1,500, not for 15,000. Langford's eyes went cold. That's your final answer? That's my final answer. Then you're a fool, and those children will pay for your foolishness. Langford stood as well, adjusting his coat. I tried to do this the civilized way, Cole. Remember that. He walked out, Carson and Sykes following, and the saloon slowly returned to its normal noise level. Ethan sat back down, his hands shaking with anger and adrenaline, knowing he'd just made things infinitely worse, but unable to regret it. He was still sitting there when a man approached from the bar, tall, weathered, maybe 60 years old, with gray hair and shrewd eyes. Ethan recognized him as John Thornton, one of the few ranchers in the area who'd managed to hold on to his land. Mind if I sit? Thornton asked. Free country. Thornton pulled out the chair Langford had vacated. That was either the bravest thing I've seen in years or the stupidest. Haven't decided which yet. Probably stupid, Ethan admitted. Probably. Thornton signaled the bartender for 2 beers. But I respect it. Not many men willing to stand up to Langford these days. Most are too scared or too smart. I might be both, just haven't admitted it yet. The beers arrived and Thornton pushed one toward Ethan. This one's on me. Figure you've earned it. He took a drink, then said casually, Heard you're looking for work? Word travels fast. Small town. I might have something for you if you're interested. Nothing permanent but steady for a while. I'm building a new barn before winter sets in properly. Need someone who knows their way around a hammer and saw. Pays not great $1.50 a day, but it's something. $1.50 a day was better than anything Ethan had found in weeks. When do you need me to start? Tomorrow morning if you can manage it. Work'll last about 3 weeks, maybe 4, depending on weather. Ethan did the math in his head. 3 weeks at $1.50 per day was over $30. Enough to buy food and supplies, maybe even those school books for Rosie. It wouldn't solve everything, but it would buy him time. I can manage it. Thank you, Mr. Thornton. John, and you're welcome. Thornton finished his beer. Fair warning, though, Langford's not going to like you working for me. Him and I have history, and it's not friendly. You take this job, you're picking a side. I picked a side when I told him no. True enough. John stood up and held out his hand. Ethan shook it, feeling the calluses of a working man. See you tomorrow morning. Bring your own tools if you've got them. After Thornton left, Ethan sat alone finishing his beer, feeling something like hope for the first time in weeks. It was small and fragile, but it was there. He had work, he had income, he had a fighting chance. He rode home as the sun was setting, the newspaper still tucked inside his coat. When he got there, he found Rosie outside chopping wood despite his instructions to stay inside where it was warm. Her hands were red with cold, and she was breathing hard, but the woodpile was noticeably larger. "Rosie, get inside before you freeze." She looked up startled. "I wanted to help. We're almost out of firewood." "I know, but you don't have gloves. Your hands are fine." She set down the axe with a defiance that reminded him painfully of her mother. "I can work same as you." Ethan dismounted and walked over to her. Her hands were cracked and bleeding in places, the cold making the damage worse. He took them gently in his own, warming them. "Listen to me. I got work, real work, building a barn for John Thornton. Starts tomorrow, lasts a few weeks. We're going to be okay." Her eyes widened. "Really? Really? So you don't need to work yourself to death trying to prove you're useful. You're a child, Rosie. You're supposed to play and learn and be young. Your mama would want that." Her face crumpled, and for a moment he thought she was going to cry, but she held it together. "Mama would want me to help however I can. She'd want you to be safe and happy. There's a difference." He released her hands. "Now come on. Let's get inside where it's warm, and I'll tell you and Tommy about the job." They went in together, and Ethan found Tommy sitting by the stove reading from an old book that had belonged to Ethan's sister, a collection of fairy tales with faded illustrations. The boy looked up when they entered. "Mr. Cole, what's a knight-errant? It's a knight who travels around looking for people to help and dragons to fight. Why? The book says they protect people who can't protect themselves." Tommy looked thoughtful. "Are you a knight-errant?" The question caught Ethan off guard. "No, son, I'm just a rancher trying to get by." "But you protect us. You fight bad people like Mr. Langford. That sounds like a knight-errant to me." Rosie smiled, the first real smile Ethan had seen from her in days. "Tommy's right. You're our knight-errant, Mr. Cole." "I'm nobody's knight," Ethan said, uncomfortable with the comparison. "Knights have armor and swords and horses that aren't half dead. I've got a failing ranch and about $1 to my name." "Knights don't need money," Tommy said with the absolute certainty of a 6-year-old. "They just need to be brave." Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he changed the subject, telling them about the job with John Thornton, about the money it would bring, about how things were going to get better. They listened with cautious hope, and when he finished, Rosie threw her arms around him in an impulsive hug that surprised them both. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not giving up on us." He patted her back awkwardly, not used to affection. "I made your mama a promise. I don't break promises." That night, after the children were asleep, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with the newspaper spread out in front of him and a lamp burning low. He read the article about water rights 3 times, making notes in the margins with a pencil. If he could prove Langford had diverted the creek illegally, if he could find the documentation Martha had mentioned, maybe he had grounds for a legal claim. It was a long shot, a desperate long shot, but he was running out of options. He was still reading when he heard a noise outside the creak of the porch boards, soft but distinct. Ethan's hand went to the rifle leaning against the wall. He stood quietly and moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. A figure stood at the edge of the porch, barely visible in the starlight, too small to be Langford or one of his men. After a moment, the figure moved into the light from the window, and Ethan saw it was a woman, young, wrapped in a shawl against the cold. He opened the door with the rifle held low. "Can I help you?" The woman jumped, startled, then stepped closer. In the lamplight from inside, he could see she was maybe 20, with dark hair and frightened eyes. "Are you Ethan Cole?" "I am." "I'm Mary Davidson. I worked at Mr. Langford's house as a maid." She glanced nervously over her shoulder. "I heard what you said to him today, about not selling, about standing up to him. Word travels faster than I thought. Mr. Cole, I know where he keeps his papers. The ones about the land, purchases, the water claims, all of it. And I know they're not all legal. I've seen him with the surveyor, watched them change boundary markers late at night when they thought no one was looking." Ethan's pulse quickened. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Wade Langford is a monster." Her voice shook. I've worked for him for 2 years, and I've seen things, terrible things, what he does to people who can't fight back, what he did to Martha Harper." She looked at him directly. "I can't prove most of it, but I can help you prove the water theft, if you're willing to fight him." "I'm willing, but why would you risk it if he finds out?" "He already suspects I'm not loyal. I'll be dismissed soon, anyway, or worse." She pulled a folded paper from inside her shawl. "This is a copy of the original survey from 1882, before he bought the upstream property. It shows the creek running through your land with full water rights. He has the original locked in his safe, but I copied it before he could destroy it." Ethan took the paper with trembling hands, unfolding it carefully. Even in the dim light, he could see it was exactly what she claimed, a territorial survey showing the creek's original course and the water rights assigned to the coal property. "This could change everything," he said quietly. "I hope so." Mary pulled her shawl tighter. "I have to go before I'm missed. But Mr. Cole, be careful. Wade Langford doesn't lose gracefully. When you use this against him, he'll come after you with everything he has. Let him come." She nodded and disappeared into the darkness, her footsteps fading into silence. Ethan stood there holding the survey document, feeling the weight of it, knowing that everything had just changed. He had ammunition now, evidence, a fighting chance, and come morning, he was going to use it. But morning brought something Ethan hadn't planned for: snow. He woke to find the world buried under 6 inches of white, still falling thick and fast, the kind of early winter storm that could last for days. Through the window he could see nothing but gray sky and swirling flakes, the barn barely visible through the curtain of white. His first thought was the children, his second was John Thornton's barn job. His third was that damn survey document hidden under his mattress. Downstairs, Rosie was already up, standing at the window with her hand pressed against the glass. "It's so much," she whispered when she heard him come down. "I've never seen this much snow before." Welcome to Wyoming winter. Ethan moved to the stove and started building up the fire. "We're going to need to keep this going all day. Tommy's still asleep." "Yes, sir. He was cold in the night, so I let him sleep in my room. Hope that's all right." "That's fine." He got the fire going strong, then turned to look at her. "Rosie, I need to go check on the animals, make sure they're secure. Then I have to ride to John Thornton's place and see if we're still working in this weather. I need you to promise me you'll stay inside and keep Tommy warm." She nodded seriously. "I promise. But Mr. Cole, what if the snow gets worse? What if you can't get back?" It was a valid fear. He'd seen men get lost in storms like this, freeze to death within yards of shelter because they couldn't see where they were going, but he couldn't afford to wait. If Thornton was still expecting him missing, the first day would look bad. And more than that, he needed to get that survey document to the Territorial Land Office before Langford found out about it. "I'll be careful, and I'll be back before dark, I promise." He pulled on his heaviest coat and wrapped a scarf around his face. "You know where the rifle is, if you need it." "Yes, sir." He went out into the storm and immediately regretted it. The wind cut through his coat like it was made of paper, and the snow was coming down so thick he could barely see 10 feet ahead. He made his way to the barn by memory and feel one hand on the fence rail to keep oriented. The animals were restless but alive, the 2 horses stamping in their stalls, the chickens huddled together for warmth. He fed them what little he could spare and made sure their water wasn't frozen solid. Then he saddled his horse and led it out into the storm. The ride to Thornton's ranch should have taken 30 minutes. It took nearly 2 hours fighting through drifts that came up to the horse's chest, stopping every few minutes to get his bearings. By the time he saw Thornton's buildings emerging from the white, Ethan couldn't feel his feet, and his face was numb despite the scarf. Thornton came out of his house when he heard the horse, took one look at Ethan, and shook his head. "You're either the most dedicated worker I've ever hired, or the craziest. Get inside before you freeze to death." Inside, Thornton's wife, a stern woman named Helen, sat Ethan by the stove and forced hot coffee into his hands. Feeling slowly returned to his extremities, painful but welcome. No work today, Thornton said, sitting across from him. Snow's too heavy and the lumber's buried anyway. We'll start when the storm clears. I understand. Ethan wrapped his hands around the coffee cup, absorbing the warmth. Mr. Thornton, I need your help with something else, something that might be dangerous. Thornton exchanged a look with his wife, then nodded. Go on. Ethan told him about the survey document about Langford's water theft, about his plan to take it to the Territorial Land Office in Casper and file a formal complaint. He watched Thornton's face, carefully looking for signs of hesitation or fear. Instead, he saw anger. I knew Langford was dirty, but I didn't know he was that dirty. Thornton stood and paced to the window, looking out at the storm. You file that complaint, you're going to war with the most powerful man in this county. You understand that? I understand. He'll come after you hard. He'll use every legal trick he knows, and when those don't work, he'll use other methods that don't show up in court records. I know. Ethan set down his coffee. But if I don't fight, I lose everything anyway. At least this way I go down swinging. Thornton was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Helen, get my winter coat. I'm riding with Ethan. John, no. Helen stood up, alarm in her voice. This storm won't last forever, and when it clears, Ethan needs to get that document filed before Langford knows what's happening. I'm going with him to make sure he gets there. Thornton looked at his wife with steady eyes. I've spent 20 years watching Langford steal land and ruin families. I'm done watching. Helen opened her mouth to argue, then closed it and went to get the coat. When she returned, she handed it to her husband along with a rifle. You come back to me, John Thornton. You hear? I hear. He kissed her cheek, then turned to Ethan. We'll wait until the snow lets up, then we ride. Meantime, you write down everything you know about Langford's theft dates, details, everything. We're going to need more than just that survey. They spent the afternoon documenting everything: the dam Ethan had found, the initials carved in stone, the timeline of his creek drying up. Thornton added his own observations about suspicious water levels on Langford's property, about seeing surveying equipment being moved at night, about conversations he'd overheard in town. By the time they finished, they had 3 pages of detailed accusations. The snow finally stopped around 4 in the afternoon, leaving the world buried but clear. Ethan knew he should have gone straight back to check on the children, but the land office closed at 5, and tomorrow Langford might know about the document. It had to be now. They rode hard through the fresh snow, the horses struggling, but game. Casper appeared through the gathering dusk lights in windows, looking warm and inviting. The Territorial Land Office was a small building near the courthouse, and they arrived just as the clerk was putting on his coat to leave. We need to file a water rights complaint, Ethan said, still breathing hard from the ride. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles, looked annoyed. Office is closed. Come back tomorrow. This can't wait. Ethan pulled out the survey document and the written accusations. Wade Langford has been illegally diverting water from my property. I have proof. The clerk's expression changed when he saw Langford's name. Everyone knew who Wade Langford was, and everyone knew crossing him was dangerous. Sir, accusations like this are serious. You're sure about? I'm sure. Just tell me what I need to file. It took another hour to fill out all the forms, to have Ethan swear to the truth of his statements, to get everything properly documented and stamped. When they finished, the clerk looked at the papers with something like pity. Mr. Cole, you know Langford's going to fight this. He's got lawyers' connections. This could drag on for years. I know. And even if you win, he's not the type to accept defeat gracefully. I've seen what happens to people who cross him. I've seen it too. Ethan picked up his copy of the filing. That's why I'm doing this. Someone has to. They left the office as full darkness fell. Ethan knew he should have felt victorious. He'd done it, filed the complaint, put the wheels of justice in motion. Instead, he just felt tired and scared and aware that he'd just made himself a target. "I need to get home," he said to Thornton. "The children, I know, go." Thornton gripped his shoulder. "You did good today, Ethan. Whatever happens next, remember that." The ride back took forever, every minute stretched by worry. What if the children had tried to come after him? What if Langford had already heard about the filing and gone to the ranch? What if? By the time he saw his buildings in the starlight, his jaw ached from clenching it. The house was dark except for one lamp in the kitchen window. Ethan practically fell off his horse and stumbled to the door, bursting inside to find both children safe at the kitchen table, playing cards by lamplight. They looked up when he entered Rosie's face, breaking into a relieved smile. "Mr. Cole, we were so worried." He sagged against the doorframe, suddenly exhausted. "I'm sorry. The storm was worse than I thought. Are you both all right?" "We're fine. We kept the fire going like you said, and Rosie made soup from the last of the beans." Tommy held up a half-eaten bowl. "It's really good." Ethan wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. Here he'd been fighting legal battles and risking everything, and they'd been home making soup and playing cards like children should, like Martha would have wanted. "I'm glad you're safe," he managed. "I'm going to tend to the horse, then I'll come back and tell you about my day." But when he went back outside, he found someone waiting by the barn, a figure in the shadows, tall and broad. Ethan's hand went to the rifle on his saddle. "Easy, Cole." Bull Carson stepped into the light from the house. "I'm not here to start trouble." "Then why are you here?" Ethan kept his hand on the rifle. "To give you a message from Mr. Langford. He knows about the filing, and he wants you to know that this fight is over before it starts. That's not his decision to make." "No, but he's got the territorial judge in his pocket. Your complaint will be dismissed within a week." Carson's voice was matter-of-fact. No threat in it, just stating reality. "You wasted your time, Cole, and you made Langford angry in the process. Tell Langford he can be as angry as he wants. The law's on my side now." "The law," Carson laughed without humor. "The law is whatever men with money say it is. You know that. You fought in the war, same as me. You saw how justice really works." It was true, and they both knew it. Ethan had seen wealthy officers escape punishment for things that would have gotten common soldiers hanged. He'd seen corruption and favoritism and justice that bent whichever way power pushed it, but that didn't mean he was going to stop fighting. "Message delivered," Ethan said coldly. "Now get off my property." Carson started to leave, then paused. "One more thing. Langford says if you drop this complaint and sell him the ranch for a fair price, he'll leave you and those kids alone. He'll even write you a good reference, help you start over somewhere else. But if you keep pushing this—" He shook his head. "He's not a forgiving man, Cole, and he's got patience. He'll wait until you're at your weakest, then he'll take everything. He's welcome to try." Carson mounted his horse and rode off into the darkness, and Ethan stood there in the cold, trying to stop his hands from shaking. Not from fear, or not just from fear, but from the realization that he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. He'd declared war on Wade Langford, and now there was no backing down. The winter was brutal. The snow that started in November kept coming through December and into January, piling up in drifts that buried fences and made every trip outside an ordeal. The barn work with Thornton had to be postponed multiple times, which meant no income beyond the few dollars Ethan had managed to save. Food got scarce again, then scarcer. They ate one meal a day, sometimes two if the chickens laid enough eggs. Rosie and Tommy grew thinner despite Ethan giving them most of his portions, but they survived. Ethan took on whatever odd jobs he could find in town, shoveling snow, hauling freight, fixing broken equipment. The work was irregular and poorly paid, but it kept them fed. Barely. And through it all, they heard nothing about the water rights complaint. No hearing, no judgment, no response at all. It was like the filing had disappeared into a bureaucratic void, which was exactly what Carson had predicted. In February, the letter finally came. Ethan found it waiting at the post office official territorial letterhead, heavy paper, bad news written in the weight of it. He opened it standing in the street, his hands numb with cold and dread. The words were formal and impersonal. Due to insufficient evidence and conflicting property claims, your complaint against Wade Langford regarding water rights has been dismissed. No hearing necessary. Case closed. Just like that. 3 months of hope gone in 3 paragraphs of legal language. Ethan stood there holding the letter, feeling something break inside him that he couldn't quite name. Not hope. Hope had died weeks ago. But maybe the will to keep fighting. The stupid, stubborn determination that had kept him going. "Mr. Cole!" He looked up to find Rosie standing beside him, wrapped in a coat 2 sizes too big that Helen Thornton had given her. Her face was pinched with cold and worry. "What's wrong?" she asked. He showed her the letter. She was learning to read better. Now Ethan had been teaching her in the evenings when they had lamp oil, and she sounded out the words slowly. When she finished, her face fell. "Does this mean Mr. Langford wins?" "Looks that way." "So what do we do now?" It was the question Ethan had been asking himself for 3 months, and he still didn't have a good answer. Surrender seemed inevitable now. Sell the ranch to Langford, take whatever he offered, move somewhere else, and try to start over. It was the smart thing to do, the sensible thing, the only thing that made sense. But as he looked at Rosie, this 8-year-old girl who'd lost everything and kept going anyway, who took care of her brother and worked harder than most adults and never complained, he knew he couldn't quit. Not yet. Not while there was still fight left in him. "We keep going," he said. "We find another way." "What way?" "I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out." She looked at him with those old eyes searching his face. Then she took his hand, cold, small fingers, wrapping around his, and squeezed. "Mama used to say that God helps those who help themselves. Maybe we just need to help ourselves a little harder." Walking home through the snow, Ethan thought about Martha Harper lying in that shack, dying but still fighting to keep her children safe. Thought about her pride and her determination and her refusal to give up, even when giving up was the only reasonable option. She'd passed that stubbornness on to her daughter, and somehow it had infected him too. That evening, after the children were asleep, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with pencil and paper making lists. Everything he owned that could be sold, every possible source of income, every person in town who might owe him a favor or be willing to help. The numbers didn't look good, but they looked better than they had 3 months ago. He'd kept the family fed through the worst of winter. The barn work would restart soon now that the weather was warming. He had time if he could just stretch it far enough. He was still making lists when he heard horses outside, multiple horses moving fast. Ethan grabbed his rifle and moved to the window just as someone pounded on the door. "Cole, open up fire at the Thornton place." Ethan threw open the door to find 3 men on horseback, all looking panicked. One of them was Thornton's ranch hand, Danny. "What happened?" Ethan demanded. "Barn caught fire about an hour ago. We got it mostly out, but John took in too much smoke. Helen sent me to fetch you. She says he's asking for you." Ethan's blood went cold. He looked back at the children's rooms, then at Danny. "How bad?" "Bad enough. You should come now." There was no choice. Ethan woke Rosie and explained where he was going, made her promise to keep the doors locked and the rifle close. She nodded sleepily, already moving to check on Tommy. Then Ethan mounted behind Danny, and they rode through the darkness toward the Thornton ranch. The smell of smoke reached them before they saw the buildings. What remained of Thornton's barn was a skeleton of charred timber, still smoking in the cold night air. Men with buckets were dousing the last of the flames. The house was untouched, but inside, Ethan found John Thornton in his bed, coughing blood into a handkerchief, while Helen held his hand. Thornton looked up when Ethan entered and tried to smile. "Told Helen I'd come back to her, didn't say what condition I'd be in." "What happened?" Ethan pulled up a chair beside the bed. "Langford happened." Thornton coughed again, painful and wet. "Or his men. Barn doors were barred from the outside when the fire started. Someone wanted to make sure it burned. Helen made a sound like a wounded animal, and Ethan felt rage settle cold and hard in his chest. You're sure? Sure enough. This is a message, Ethan. For you and me both. Thornton gripped Ethan's arm with surprising strength. He's escalating. Next time it won't be a barn, it'll be a house, with people inside. We should go to the sheriff and tell him that we suspect Wade Langford of arson. With no proof, the sheriff won't touch him. Thornton coughed again, worse this time. When he caught his breath, he said, I'm done fighting, Ethan. This nearly killed me, and it nearly killed Helen, too. I can't keep risking everything. I understand. But you're not done, are you? You're going to keep pushing. Ethan thought about Rosie and Tommy asleep in his house. Thought about Martha Harper's dying request to keep them safe. Thought about everything he'd promised and everything he still owed. I have to, he said simply, for the children. Thornton nodded like he'd expected that answer. Then be smarter than I was. Don't give Langford a target he can hit. Protect what matters and let everything else go if you have to. That's what I'm trying to do. Then try harder. Thornton closed his eyes, exhausted. Because men like Langford, they don't stop until they win or until someone stops them permanently, and I don't think you're the killing type, Ethan Cole. Ethan didn't answer because he wasn't sure that was true anymore. He stayed until dawn, helping Helen tend to John and making sure the fire was completely out. Then he rode home as the sun came up, his mind churning with dark thoughts. Thornton was right, Langford wouldn't stop. The legal system had failed. The threat of violence was real. Every conventional option had been exhausted. But as he crested the hill and saw his ranch spread out below the house where two orphaned children slept safely, the fields that would grow again when the rains came, the grave on the hillside where Martha Harper rested, Ethan realized something. He'd been thinking about this wrong the whole time. He'd been trying to fight Langford using Langford's weapons, money, lawyers, power. And he kept losing because Langford had more of all three. But there were other kinds of power, the power of community, the power of truth told loudly enough that it couldn't be ignored, the power of people who'd been hurt, deciding they'd been hurt enough. Ethan had spent months trying to win alone. Maybe it was time to stop being alone. Over the next 3 months, as winter faded into spring and the snow melted to reveal brown grass that would someday be green again, Ethan started talking. To every rancher who'd been pushed off their land, to every family Langford had squeezed, to every person in town who'd watched the man consolidate power and said nothing because they were afraid. He told them about the water theft, about the dismissed complaint about Mary Davidson's testimony and the survey document. He told them about Martha Harper and what Langford had done to her family. He told them about the Thornton barn fire and all the other accidents that seemed to happen to anyone who challenged Langford's authority. And slowly people started listening, started admitting their own stories, started realizing they weren't alone. By May, 15 families had signed a petition demanding a territorial investigation into Langford's business practices. By June, the territorial governor facing election and needing votes from rural Wyoming announced a formal inquiry. By July, investigators had found enough evidence of fraud, intimidation, and illegal land seizures to bring charges. Wade Langford was arrested in August, led out of his mansion in handcuffs, while half the town watched. His trial was scheduled for September. The judge who'd dismissed Ethan's water complaint was removed from the case after evidence surfaced linking him to Langford's payroll. And on a warm September morning with Rosie and Tommy sitting beside him in the courtroom, Ethan listened as the verdict came down guilty on 17 counts of fraud, theft, and intimidation. Guilty on the water rights violations, all land acquired through illegal means to be returned to rightful owners. Wade Langford sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison. When it was over, Ethan walked out of that courthouse into sunshine that felt warmer than it had in years. Rosie grabbed his hand, Tommy grabbed the other, and they stood there on the courthouse steps, watching Langford being led away in chains. "Did we win?" Tommy asked. Ethan thought about everything it had cost to get here, the months of hunger, the fear, the exhaustion, the moments when giving up seemed like the only sane option. He thought about Martha Harper dying in his parents' bed, making him promise to protect her children. He thought about all the small choices that had led to this moment. "Yeah," he said finally, "we won." 3 years later, the ranch was thriving again. The creek ran clear and full through the property, feeding fields of wheat that grew tall and golden. Cattle grazed in pastures that had been dead ground when Ethan first took in 2 starving children. Rosie was 11 now, top of her class in school, reading books about law and justice that Ethan borrowed from the territorial library. Tommy was 9 strong for his age, splitting his time between schoolwork and ranch chores with equal enthusiasm. And every Sunday they climbed the hill together to visit Martha Harper's grave. The simple wooden cross had been replaced with a proper headstone, white marble, with her name carved clear and deep, along with the names of her children and a line Rosie had chosen. She taught us that kindness is strength. On this particular Sunday, as they stood by the grave in the late afternoon sun, Rosie said quietly, "Do you think Mama would be proud of us?" Ethan looked at the children, not so small anymore, healthy and bright and full of the futures their mother had fought to give them. "I think she'd be proud of who you're becoming, both of you." "And you?" Tommy asked. "Are you proud of us?" It was such a simple question asked with such earnest hope that Ethan felt his throat tighten. These children who'd come to him with nothing but a rag doll and a stick, who'd survived hunger and cold and grief, who'd never stopped believing that tomorrow might be better than today. "Every single day," he said, "every single day I'm grateful I was stubborn enough to say yes when I should have said no." As they walked back down the hill toward home, the setting sun painted everything gold. The house, the barn, the fields, stretching toward the horizon. Inside, Helen Thornton would be waiting with supper cooking on the stove. John had recovered from the smoke damage and visited most Sundays, now teaching Tommy woodworking and telling stories that made Rosie laugh. Mary Davidson had married a good man from town and stopped by monthly with her children, who played with Tommy and Rosie like cousins. They'd built something here that was bigger than a ranch, stronger than property lines, more lasting than any legal document. They'd built a family from broken pieces and a community from scattered survivors. They'd built it with nothing but stubbornness and hope and the absolute refusal to let cruelty win. And standing there on his porch watching the children race ahead toward the house, Ethan finally understood what Martha Harper had meant when she'd said that taking on children meant being responsible for who they became. Because Rosie and Tommy hadn't just survived, they'd learned that hunger didn't have to be normal, that poverty didn't define worth, that one person caring enough could change everything. They'd learned that true wealth wasn't measured in cattle or coins, but in how many lives you kept from hunger, how many children you taught that kindness was possible, how many times you chose to fight when fighting seemed foolish. And someday, when they were grown and gone, they'd carry those lessons forward and teach them to others, and the choice Ethan had made on a dusty Wyoming street would echo forward through generations, proof that nobility wasn't about birth or money, but about seeing someone who needed help and deciding to be the one who helped.